Get on the train before it leaves the station. The truth train is coming, gonna run them down.
Hey, hello there, folks. How you doing? Okay, here we are. It's 2 days after Thon. Well, probably by the time this is uploaded, it'll be 3 days. But so here we are, you know, and so now I'm going back into Thon there, and I'm pulling out some segments for you. So this segment that we're looking at today is the segment with retired FBI agent Steve Moore and all of the very, very, very helpful and brilliant things that he has to say and observations that he's made regarding Brendan's case. And so that's what we got here today for you, folks. If you missed it during Thon, make sure you don't miss it here, because Steve Moore is absolutely brilliant. I feel very confident we will be seeing Steve Moore in the future here on my channel, and I'm very, very, very stoked about that, because he just has a way of explaining these things about investigations, these which can be complicated, right? We haven't all gone to school to know all the SOP and everything that's involved with, you know, all these things, right? So it's nice, it's very, very nice to have somebody like Steve who's able to come in and shine a little bit of light on some of this stuff for us, and give us his opinion of where it was going wrong and where it wasn't quite proper or kosher or whatever you might want to say. And so it's really, really brilliant to be able to have Steve Moore around to give us some of his, you know, very, very experienced opinions. So here we go. This is my talk with retired FBI agent Steve Moore about Brendan, which aired during Thon. Here we go. Alrighty, hello there, folks. It's Thon, and it's a great pleasure of mine to have here Mr. Steve Moore, who you can see. He is, some of you may know from another video on my channel that's very popular where I spoke with him. He's a retired FBI agent. He was actually somewhat involved in the Amanda Knox case, and obviously is very knowledgeable about investigations. So it's great to have you here with us, Steve. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing okay. I mean, you know, in the midst of everything that's going on, I suppose I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, in the midst of Corona or COVID-19,
yeah,
and lockdowns and protocols. But hey, I think I don't know what you think, but me personally, I think it looks like mask wearing may be a way that we'll be able to really keep this thing from getting out of control, and so feeling pretty hopeful about that. So.
Well, I'm feeling hopeful. I'm just not a medical guy. I'll just, you know, if they tell me to wear a mask, I'm wearing a mask.
Yeah, so. I get it. I base it on what I see about the curves coming out of like countries like, you know, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan, who are like natural mask wearing cultures, and just seeing that their curve kind of naturally flattens, and it's like, 1 + 1 = 2 kind of thing, you know. But
it would be nice if that'll work for us.
Hopefully, yes, absolutely. So obviously, yes, we are living in this time during Thon of COVID-19. So everybody do be safe, and that's obviously another reason why this is good, that this is an online streaming event, because none of us have to be in the same room with each other, potentially passing this ugly thing to each other. So that's another good thing about the streaming events like this one, where people can get together and show their support for maybe not just Stephen and Brendan here at Thon, but if you care about other things, whatever it is you're passionate about, animals, you know, wildlife, there's all kinds of things people care about. So obviously, all right, so here we are with Steve Moore, and I got some questions for him, because obviously, folks, you know me, I am pounding and pounding and pounding on the Brendan nail, and I will not stop. I'm going to just keep going at it. And we all know Brendan's in a position right now where Governor Evers could rectify this whole thing. You know, he could at least let Brendan go. And that's what Brendan's lawyers are advocating for, and that's what they're applying that pressure on Governor Evers. So I wanted to go ahead and focus on talking about Brendan today while we're here talking to Steve, and get some of his opinions about Fassbender, Wiegert, and some of their methods, and just hear some of the common sense stuff that Steve has to say when it comes to Brendan, obviously. So so I have some questions for you here, and
all right.
you know, so all right. First question I want to you know, get into is it's been pretty well established. There's been an under the hood analysis done by a professor at the Wisconsin School of Law, or at the University of Wisconsin School of Law, and a speech language pathologist, where they really went under the hood in the Brennan interrogation, and they came up with some things, and what it's becoming very clear is that most people agree that the facts were fed to Brendan by the investigators.
Oh yeah.
And with some things coming from the media, obviously, because he and his family were watching the media because they were in it every night. So certainly he was being able to pick up some things from the media to help fill in between the gaps between what he was being fed, right? So it's pretty well established, right? I wanted to ask you if you can explain or just give us a brief, example possibly or something of why it's so important not to be feeding your suspect facts. At least certainly not in the gross amount of facts that are being fed to Brendan.
Well, it's in a perfect world, in a real courtroom, especially a federal courtroom, there's a thing called culpable knowledge. Culpable knowledge is something that only the person who did the crime would know, except possibly for the investigators. Say the person wrote something in the room, maybe wrote something on a wall. And the police or the FBI or whoever it is, they're the only ones who know what was written on the wall.
Right.
So if you get somebody who comes in and says, I shouldn't have written blah, blah, blah on the wall. Or worst case for them is, yeah, I heard whoever it did wrote so on the wall. Then here's somebody who knows it. If in trial they can prove that you told this person what was on the wall or gave them the information, then it's no longer culpable knowledge.
Right.
And it's more important. It should be more important than do I get a conviction or not. As a law enforcement investigator, I was always terrified of getting the wrong person, of getting onto the wrong person, because if I put somebody in jail, I'm responsible for quite a bit of that. And, a lot of people don't
curtailing
understand.
their freedom and sure, yeah, that's a heavy weight to consider, yeah.
Listen, there are people whose cases I worked on who will be there for longer than I live, if they live longer than that.
Right.
And I can tell you a funny thing that happened to me, and I can remember the first time the judge, the jury read off guilty, and the judge pronounced sentence. I went cold inside because I realized, oh my gosh, this is what I've been working for. This is what I fought to get. And now it's done. And then that thought, did you get it right? I mean, I was half the afternoon not being able to eat, going back over every single investigative step I took. And I wanted to be right.
Because of how much is in the scales, right? I mean,
you're taking away a person's life or parts of it.
Right.
And if an investigator doesn't feel just a twinge of that at the end of an investigation, I don't think they understand the gravity of what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. I mean, and what happened with Brendan is certainly, it's obvious to look at it on the surface, but the more and more analysis gets done, it begins to become more and more obvious, I think. But, but obviously,
it should have been obvious to any good investigator. It should have been obvious from the first videos that came out. Right. I don't know how anybody could look at that and say he had culpable knowledge of that crime or any other crime.
Exactly. Watching the whole thing, you realize it's all suggested to him in ways like the next question actually will suggest. And one of the things in the under the hood analysis that I was mentioning to you, that one of the things that came out was they were analyzing the types of questions asked and how many of each type of question were asked. And one of the really interesting stats that came out was the fact that they had asked him an insane number of yes or no questions. Very few open-ended questions. Fair amount of actually multiple choice questions where they were basically asking the question and proposing a few different answers. And those types of questions. But like an astronomical amount of yes or no questions. And what they were saying in this analysis is when you ask somebody a yes or no question, you are conveying a great deal of information in the asking of it, because you're kind of coming up with a premise essentially, and asking about it, right? So it's like if it's a yes or no question. So in by using questions like that, so I want to ask you your opinion. Did they teach you as an investigator to at least limit the amount of yes or no questions that you ask in an interview?
Well, obviously you want to, because what you're looking for is them to tell you something you don't already know. I mean, think about it. There's an interview when you're trying to elicit information that you don't have. That's one. And number two is an interrogation when you are trying to elicit a confession.
Right.
Yes or no questions are for interrogations, not interviews. Yes or no questions, number one, as you say, they provide information to the person you're interviewing.
Right.
Did Jane Doe scream, "Don't"? Well, apparently, and now he's bookmarked it in his mind, she may have screamed, "Don't." Okay.
Right.
Then you get another yes or no question down the line where they say, when she screamed, "Don't," were you holding her down? Well, now I know she actually did scream, "Don't." So
Right.
yes or no questions are terribly dangerous.
Sure.
Multiple choice questions are just stupid. Because what the person knows is, well, the correct answer is one of those.
Right.
Because they've told me it's one of those. So yeah, you don't do that. And in an interview, what you're trying to do is elicit information. Find out what actually went on. It is an honest exercise in trying to figure out what went wrong. When you're asking all yes or no questions, don't tell me that you are trying to elicit information that you don't have. You've already decided what's true.
And you're steering things, right?
You are steering the person. And I have no problems with an interrogation to try and get a confession if I have the case made without their help.
Right.
And, you know, now that I'm retired, I can tell you this. If I had the case made against them, and a confession would help,
right?
I would walk in and tell them that. Listen, I got the case made against you. I don't need your help. If you want to talk to me, I'm here to listen. But otherwise, I'm going. I'm going to get a cup of coffee. I don't need your help. And you'd be surprised how many people want to say, no, wait a minute, wait. And they try to talk you out of it. And in talking you out of it, they do, give information up.
Right.
But at the point they were with Brendan, nothing was known.
In other words, it's supposed to be an interview, right?
Yes. And how can you interrogate somebody for a crime that you don't know the facts of?
Right.
How can you want them to confess to some? I mean, yes, in an interview, you would like a guilty person to tell you that they did it and go forward from there.
Right.
But you are still trying to elicit whether or not they did it. You don't come in deciding that they did.
There's a different approach for an interrogation than there is for an interview. Absolutely. Is what you're saying.
I can suspect somebody has done it, but I can tell you there have been several times in my career where I have suspected somebody's done something, brought them in for an interview, and realized, hey, Steve, you may be wrong here. And if an investigator is not willing to look at themselves in a mirror and say, hey, dude, you're fallible, then you don't belong there.
Yeah, right. It's good to be conscientious. I agree with that. So
it helps you sleep at night.
You would say then that it's pretty lame to hear Wiegert and Fassbender saying that they were ever interviewing Brendan, because it was. Would you say that, in your opinion, that they were all interrogations, that there was never really any interviewing going on?
I think maybe the first few times there were interviews, but when you had Fassbender and Wiegert and Brendan Dassey in the room together, the question that I would ask is, who is the most naive? And I'm just not sure who it was. Because this guy could have said, I flew to the moon, landed in a parachute, and then held down the victim. And they'd say, ooh, boy, that's kinky. Great. Okay. And write it down. They were so naive. And, I'll go on about that in a little bit. I'm sure you'll
there's a question that'll get into that a little bit. So, all right. So I'll move on to the next one. I think it's actually maybe this one here. Hypothetical situation. If you are interrogating, well, you're supposed to be interviewing, but you're interrogating an obviously limited suspect who is telling different stories and causing you to ask, why did you say something different earlier? To which the suspect then responds to you saying, I've been guessing the whole time. Where does that, at that point, where do you, at that point as an investigator, like, where does that take your mind? I guess I want to know.
Well, the problem is I was an FBI agent, so I have to write that down. Right. I have to make sure that that's in my report. And at that point, everybody throws up their hands and says every single thing he said before that statement is no longer valid. He has disowned every single thing he said.
Right.
So you can write down what he said, but in a federal court of law, I mean, that's not going to be listened to. Right. I mean, he has just said, oh, by the way, everything I told you, it's a lie, or I didn't know what I was talking about.
Right.
It's over. Just rip the pages out of your book. I mean, you couldn't because it's part of evidence, but start over.
Right.
That's when you start over. Okay, Brendan, why don't you go back to your room? We'll go back to ours, and when you're not confused, let's do this again.
Right. Right. So you would say that there's, at least maybe in some areas, in some states, that don't kind of, they don't live up to the same standard as the federal courts in terms of that sort of thing?
The federal court requires more of an investigator.
Yeah.
Just plain and simple. Right. It is, when you are at the federal level, I mean, I felt like in the witness stand, I couldn't get them to accept my identity unless my mother was there to say, yes, that's my son, here's his birth certificate. I mean, things that are just accepted in state court, stipulated, are not in federal court. I'm not saying that the federal investigators are better investigators, that they're smarter, right, but they are held to a higher standard. You go into a federal court and say, I haven't done my homework, you're dead.
Yeah.
I mean, they will put sanctions on you. They won't just say, oh, let's see, should I make you do it or whatever? No, you can get sanctions.
Wow.
And so it's a very, let me just say it this way. It's the strictest teacher in the school.
Right, right. I can imagine. I remember from the last time we talked and how you, and the way you talked about the kind of bar that you have to meet when you contact the federal prosecutor, in terms of certain things, like with a suspect with limitations or potential limitations and stuff. So I do recall that was very interesting. So, all right. So obviously a suspect saying something along those lines should have thrown up red flags. Like, we're all in agreement, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So my next question would be, in your opinion, is it at all believable when we hear Fassbender and Wiegert claim that they had no idea that Brendan had any limitations, or how believable is that they might be able to claim that and they could actually be true?
It's possible. I mean,
possible. Yeah.
Think about it. Do you think that these guys were top of the class? Probably not. I mean, they could make mistakes like that. I could probably make a mistake like that. Yeah. But at a certain point, you're going to start suspecting. And frankly, ignorance isn't a defense.
Right.
If a cop stops you and says, well, I didn't know what the speed limit was, well, I'm sorry, Fass. If you say, I didn't know he was challenged in any way, it doesn't matter. The court should throw it out.
Right.
That's see, Fassbender was allowed to do something that I would have gotten my butt handed to me for. Right. If I went into federal court with a document and said, aha, here, he confessed everything, and the defense said, did you know at the time that he was challenged or his IQ was so-and-so? And I said, no, I didn't know that. The judge would say, okay, fine, we're throwing out the statement.
Right. Because the judge is going to look at it as ignorance isn't an excuse for you either, basically.
Yeah, and the defense doesn't lie with me. The defense lies with the person who's challenged. I don't have any right to put something in there that they are defended from producing. I mean, they have a right not to give that information, and if they do, the court has a right, has an obligation to determine the validity of any statement like that made. Right. And I may have said this before, but I don't blame the police, law enforcement, sheriffs in this jurisdiction for this as much as I blame the courts that allowed it. I mean, yeah. If your teacher at school, I keep using this as an analogy, it's probably an offensive one to some law enforcement, but if you've got the most permissive teacher in the school, you're going to walk into their class, kids are going to be standing on their desk, throwing papers, yelling, it's going to be a madhouse. You go into the room where you got the strictest teacher, kids are going to be learning, and it's going to be quiet. You almost don't want to blame the kids for what they were allowed to do. Okay. I blame the court system for what they looked at and said, oh, yeah, fine with me.
And said, this is what? Okay, right.
Yeah, no, that's not fine.
Right.
That's not okay.
Well, that's another change I hope to see that the courts are going to start recognizing, with hopefully particularly with juveniles, how serious this is. So that's another hope of mine. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's see here. In your opinion, as an experienced investigator, what do you feel are the two biggest mistakes made by Wiegert and Fassbender with Brendan and/or Stephen?
First of all, I didn't want to insinuate earlier that they're not intelligent, or I came across as harsh. What I'm believing is that they don't have a lot of experience in this type of crime. Sure. and botched it badly. I'm sure they're great people. I'm sure they're very intelligent and have good records and other things. I'm not sure, but I mean, it's very possible.
Understood. Good to be diplomatic.
Yeah. The biggest mistake they made is believing themselves. It comes down to checking yourself. I mean, I'm a pilot. You know, that's my other specialty. In fact, that's what I do for a living now that I'm retired.
Right.
If I go through the checklist and the checklist says your gear isn't down, and I say, it's not really going to matter, and I land anyway. I mean, when an investigator looks and says my investigation is flawed, but I'm going to go ahead with it anyway.
Right.
They came up with a scenario for the crime that they believed that was ridiculous.
Yeah. And
then had Brendan
rubber stamp it.
Rubber stamp it. Some of it, I'm sure he said some things that he made up, and they said, "Ooh, that's even better than what I was thinking." Yeah. You know, and they added it, and you know, this reminds me of the Chris Tapp case in Idaho Falls so much. But they added it, and they came up with a thing that they decided they were going to believe, and they were going to go to the grave with this thing.
Right.
And that's their biggest mistake. The second biggest mistake is failing to do what is absolutely required of a law enforcement officer anytime there's a confession. Corroborate it.
Corroborate.
If you cannot corroborate a confession, it didn't exist.
It's a good story, as you put it last time. I like that.
Yeah, great story. I'd stick with it. But it didn't happen.
Right.
You know, and if a guy said in an interrogation that, yeah, right before the murder, I went over to Sleepy Joe's and had a drink, and I go to Sleepy Joe's and they say he hasn't been in here for months.
Right.
Well, maybe that doesn't have to do with murder, but all of a sudden my confession is looking pretty bad.
Right.
And I spent, I probably told you last time, on one case, I spent over a year corroborating the confession of a guy who shot, you know, a dozen people.
No, right.
And this is one murder case, and they've got a guy saying things that are demonstrably false.
Right.
You know, his description of the murder is exactly the way it never happened.
Right.
So That's important.
Yeah.
Your confession sucks. It will not hold water unless you're in, somebody's court who's very permissive, and who also apparently has come to a conclusion in the case prior to trial.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's an interesting aspect of it. It's, yeah, I think we're going to touch on it in one of my questions coming up. In fact, this one right here. This is something, that of late that I've just really been pounding on, because it's the one thing to me in both investigations that bothers me. And it's the way that, like, standard operating procedures seem to get abandoned so often. It's always, it's just rubbed me wrong. Because, I mean, for me, I see that as a safety net for officers and agents of the state, for them to operate within, to kind of, keep themselves kind of from getting implicated or personally liable or anything like that. So that, my question to you is in regard to that, to that investigations in general, is important to follow SOP. If an investigator chooses to ignore SOP, aren't they basically opening themselves up to scrutiny and possible liability? And can you explain why SOP is so important to an investigation?
Yeah, absolutely. We learned, the nation learned during the OJ trial, what happens when a law enforcement officer, an agent of the court, whoever, does not follow rules. One of the investigators there had a vial of blood that was taken, and he kept it in his pocket, I believe, overnight, and then brought it in and put it in. Well, that blood all of a sudden became suspicious, and the jurors disregarded it. That's why you don't do dumb stuff. Right. And again, I've done dumb stuff. Okay, right. I'm not saying that I am the investigator who these things that I'm telling you came from hard lessons. Right. And if you keep evidence, if you ever bring evidence to your own house, oh gosh, and anybody finds out about it, you might as well throw the evidence away. You're not going to get it in at least a federal court.
But what if you've been withholding it?
If you've been withholding it, then then there's all sorts of things. I mean, if I intentionally withheld Brady material, exculpatory evidence from a federal court, I guarantee you, I would be prosecuted.
Ooh, prosecuted. He didn't just say sanctioned, folks. He said prosecuted.
The FBI does not. Mince around with that. I remember Louis Freeh, who was the director before Robert Mueller, during the time of the Clinton investigations and stuff. And I'm not getting political on this. I'm just saying that at one point Clinton went before a grand jury and said, "I never had sex with a woman," and it turns out he did.
Right.
And the director of the FBI wrote the agents a letter saying, "You are not, you weren't elected. You were appointed, by me, essentially. Mm-hmm. And if any of you ever lies in a courtroom, I will not only fire you, but I will prosecute you."
Yep.
So there's no gray area.
Yeah, that's pretty serious. He's taking his job pretty serious, it sounds like. Okay, so that takes us to our last question here for Mr. Moore. And it kind of gets into what we were alluding to, and it goes along with, as an investigator, is it common for you or any other law enforcement officer to store evidence in your own personal custody for, say, 12 years, as was done with the Dassey computer CD in the Avery case? I mean, just give us I don't know, a few ideas or scenarios where you...
On a 1 to 10, how bad is that?
Yeah.
It's an 11, because number one, the fact that you didn't use it in court means that it didn't have any prosecutive value to you,
right?
Which kind of assumes that, well, maybe it had exculpatory value,
right?
And at that point, the defense attorney can have a motion to have that evidence brought into court and completely examined. And God help the investigator um, if they find obvious exculpatory information on that in that
Yeah.
evidence that the investigator had a reason to be aware of.
Right, absolutely. And that's what's actually happened too, is because literally right after Stevens' original motion for post-conviction relief was denied by Judge Sukowitz, suddenly the state popped up with this CD and said, "Oh, here, this Tom Fassbender had this in his own personal custody for the last 12 years. Here it is."
Inadmissible.
Yeah.
Well,
they couldn't admit it, but Zellner went, "What is this?" and found out what it was and went, "Oh, this is a detailed analysis of what was on the DASA computer," and found out that it had never been handed over before, and so that's now become a Brady violation, and so that's
it is a Brady violation, and somebody should get in serious trouble for that. And obviously, these departments down there were not very disciplined. It's not that they didn't get training. How do you get through, the post academy without knowing that that's not allowed? I mean, right. What you allow, you encourage. And in those departments at that time, these guys were allowed to get away with anything.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a different little ball of wax there in that area of Wisconsin. I've even gotten involved in something a little bit to the west of Manitowoc now, over in Neenah, which is close to Appleton, and so there's some concerning things there where it seems like law enforcement kind of gets away with a lot, and they're able to kind of brush things under the rug fairly easily, which I find concerning.
It should concern you. And, there's neat stories on the other side. I mean, I was working the Chris Tapp case in Idaho Falls. He went to jail for 18 years for a crime that he didn't commit. Right. He was finally released, and a new police chief came into Idaho Falls. He had no reason to open, no good reason, at least as far as his department, to reopen that case. But not only did he reopen it, the guy's a pro from the big city. He reopened it, found who really did it, and came out publicly with it.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
that's and opened his department up essentially for
criticism, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but he did it because he was a professional, and I'm just amazed. That's what we need more of.
I would encourage the public to be, maybe a little bit forgiving in situations like that, to inspire more police chiefs to take that attitude. I mean, obviously the victims of it are going to, the victims that were, the guy that's stuck in prison for a long time is obviously going to have a lot to bear. He's got a legitimate gripe, but.
And he's owed. I'm just saying that.
But I mean, if we make an atmosphere where police chiefs feel like they can come in and do this without it crippling the local economy, we might actually see a bit more of it, which I think could be helpful to the wheels of justice spinning. Just
have to get people in who are willing to act on integrity, not on my next case will make me feel good.
Right, absolutely. Or not chasing convictions for their own sake, and that sort of thing. Right, absolutely. Well, okay. Well, that's all my questions, and I got to say it's been a pleasure speaking with you again.
Good talking to you.
I know a lot of people are also interested in the Amanda Knox case. If you wanted to, before we finish up here, talk a little bit about that and kind of, I don't know, it's just some of the criminal justice issues involved with that you found interesting.
Well, what you will find in just about any miscarriage of justice is you start out with a crime, you start out with a theory of the crime that is flawed, and then you start adding people to the crime. Mm-hmm. You added Brendan Dassey. In the Knox case, they had a suspect, and they added Amanda.
Right.
So that's very similar. You have people keeping and hiding evidence. That's similar. All these things have to happen. They say that for a commercial airliner to crash in this modern age, 3 or 4 things, serious things, have to happen in order. And they say the chances of that happening are, astronomical. Right. For an innocent person to go to prison, 3 or 4 serious violations of the criminal code, of the evidence code. 3 or 4 of those things have to happen simultaneously, or at least in order, and have it hushed up for somebody to stay in prison. And so the Knox case was simply another one of those situations. And the good part is she got to go to her wedding last month.
Right.
She's happy. And that's one where it's worked out, and worked out positively. And I couldn't be happier.
Perhaps you could put in a good word for me, and I can try to send her an email and see if she wants to come on for Mamathon.
I'll see what I can do. She's very much involved now. She's using her experience to help the wrongfully convicted.
I noticed I've been seeing her on Twitter and stuff. I've been seeing her get pretty vocal, so that's why I figured it might be worth a shot. So
she's got a podcast about innocence and things,
right.
crimes like that. You can check it out.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'll have to look that one up. I think I did hear about it too. So
yeah, right. I'm not going to give you the name of it. I don't want to sound like a shill.
That's all right. I'll be able to find it. There's not too many Amanda Knoxes out there that come up in a Google search. So.
No, not a lot.
All righty. Well, like I said, it's been a pleasure, Steve, having you here for
Good
Mamathon.
talking to you.
And everybody out there, we're going to be now moving on to the next segment. Thank you very much, Steve.
Keep fighting for Brendan. You guys are the only thing that are going to get him out.
Yep. Hashtag I stand with Brendan Dassey.
See you later.
Alrighty there, folks. That was my interview with Steve Moore. I mean, brilliant. Do you guys notice when I asked him, like, how believable it is when we hear, like, Fassbender say he didn't know that Brendan had any limitations? I mean, can we really believe that? I mean, is that believable, right? And you heard what he said, where he said, yeah, it's possible. You know, and he went on to talk about what you have to ask yourself in that situation, in that interrogation room, is who was the most naive, right? And then he talks about in there, to illustrate how naive he believes they were in certain ways. He talks about Brendan could have said he flew a rocket to the moon, all right, and parachuted down onto the moon and held the victim down, and they would have probably said, ooh, that sounds kinky, and they would have written it down. And he's basically saying it's a matter of who in that room do you believe is the most naive. And it was like, to put it, and once he put it in that kind of terms and in that perspective, I kind of was like, right. But then he goes on to say, but ignorance isn't a defense. Certainly not in federal court, which is the kind of court he, as an FBI agent, was most often finding himself in, right? And in a federal court, ignorance is not accepted. You heard him say it. The judge would say, did you know he had limitations? And then he said, and I would tell the judge, no, I didn't know. And the judge would say, oh, okay, fine. We're throwing this out. Boom. So, he's basically saying that what went on with Brendan, what happened with Brendan, does not follow proper investigational procedures and tactics and stuff. It certainly not for any, they claim they were interviewing, it's like, no, they suggested to him that he didn't go get off the bus and walk with Blaine straight to the trailer and play video games, which is the story he told consistently. They broke him from that. They broke him away from that story by suggesting that he went to Steve's trailer or that he heard something. And they kept making these suggestive things, suggesting more of the narrative of what they were expecting from him. And he eventually broke away from the story that he was telling repeatedly without changing. And he begins trying to follow their leads to tell them what they want. And that's what it becomes. And the fact that they don't realize that is just, that's when Steve's words about them being naive really, really hit home. I was thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, they are. They're completely naive if they do not realize what they did. And they may just be that naive. Or they may be really, really, really heartless bastards. Either way, Brendan don't deserve it. So, you know, anyway, it's a brilliant interview. I mean, so many of the things he had to say. I loved it when we got into the discussion about the CD. And what he immediately was like, if it was held back, you know, the fact, he talked about somebody from the OJ case who took something home overnight. Okay? And Fassbender had that CD for 12 years. Okay? It was in his own personal custody for 12 years. And Jerry Buting, I think, has given us, has pointed out why that is. Because Jerry and Dean always go in to the evidence. They before trial comes, they go in and they look over they look through the evidence room and look at every single piece of evidence and make sure that they've been familiar with every single. It's just something they do to make sure they haven't missed anything. Okay? And Jerry is like, that CD wasn't there. It wasn't there for us to find. Now, those who believe Avery is guilty will say to you, this is what the argument they will make. This is the argument the state made regarding the CD. And that is that they didn't violate Brady because they turned over 7 DVDs that were the entire content of the Dassey computer. Okay? You're essentially dropping a truckload of information on somebody. When you have a CD that was created by a computer forensic expert that had all of the stuff, everything that was in the computer that was potentially useful to the defense, right? All that stuff that was in that CD was not turned over. So, and you know what? It's, you know, the thing is that if Avery's guilty, why are they afraid to turn over? Why are they afraid to turn that over? If he's guilty, and the evidence speaks to that, why are you having to do shady shenanigans like that? Because what they did was dropped a truckload of information, the entire 7 DVDs containing the contents of the Dassey computer, and dumped it all on Dean and Jerry a month before Danny was due, which is what that evidence would have helped them with. It would have helped them create more Denny suspects who they could actually point to during trial and actually say their name. That's what this evidence could have done. And this evidence would have pretty much taken out one of the prosecution's main witnesses, being Bobby Dassey. Bobby Dassey would not have been put on the stand by the prosecution if they had turned over this CD. If they had turned over that CD, he would not have been able to testify. It's that freaking simple. It is that freaking simple. That's why they waited until a month before Danny was due and dumped 7 DVDs, a truckload of information on them, right before the time they needed that information. Jamming them up. And hoping that they wouldn't discover what was on those DVDs, so that they could hold on to their star witness. That's the reality of it, folks. And that's why I was so glad to get Steve Moore's opinion regarding that CD and the just BS that the state is pulling regarding it and other things, obviously. Remember, folks, the one thing about the Avery case is that the stuff keeps coming up, folks. This new stuff keeps coming up. New things keep coming out. But it always ends up looking bad for the state. It always ends up making the state look bad. It always ends up making the state look foolish. It always ends up making... Nothing is coming out that is reinforcing faith in the decision of Avery and Dassey's guilt. None of that. There's nothing like that coming up. But continuously we continue to find, you know, disingenuous dealings by the state. Yeah. So, that was my interview with Steve Moore from MaM, folks. I hope you really enjoyed it. MaMathon was a huge success again. Really awesome. Love seeing the entire community come together the way it does during MaMathon, and everybody getting together and making it such a great event to be a part of, and it's just amazing. Even when I'm not live, I get to go on to somebody else's live and chat with a bunch of other people in the live chat, and it's just such a great feeling, such a good thing, you know, and everything. And then, you know, obviously, I don't know how many of you realize, but at the end of MaMathon, Mr. Seabrook decided to go live right when I was finishing up. So he went live, and he was playing some music. He was playing some of his songs. It was great. It was really great because, you know, we love listening to Stacy's songs because Stacy's songs are really good. I mean, he's very, I would say, I'm not shy. He's a lyrical genius. The dude knows how to pack in the words and get the right kind of rhythm that he's looking for. Dude knows how to do it. And his songs are really good. And so we were all hanging out there, and he played, I think, maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 songs, and then he was talking about, well, I think I'm going to go, and I think, you know, but thank you everybody for showing up, and like, so he talks it all down, literally to the moment, like, where he should be clicking the button to stop the live, right? And he goes, actually, no, I'm not. And then he's like, he goes into another, like, 10 songs. It was great. So it was a lot of fun. There was just, these are the things that make MaMathon a success. I mean, those of you who saw the clip that Stacy did last year, he didn't actually go live and play music for us last year, but he did something else that was really funny. And after MaMathon had ended, he posted a video on his YouTube channel and then started posting it on Facebook everywhere. And it's just him there going, looking at his phone. He's like, got this look on his face like, there's no lives? Nobody's live? Dude, we were all dying. So hilarious stuff. So those of you know, Stacy makes his songs generally on his own by himself, and which, by the way, I tend to really dig those gritty versions. The ones where he works the song up and posts it before he takes it into the studio. I love those versions. You know. And a lot of other people I know do too. And we're constantly having to fight with Stacy to keep him available so that we can listen to him. But, you know, Stacy tends to like the stuff that he goes into the studio. So that's fine. I mean, the polish is great. I mean, those of you who know, I love TikTok Manitowoc Pro Tools version. The Pro Tools version of TikTok Manitowoc is freaking off the hook. Off the hook. That is the most iconic song I think that Stacy has written, and that's saying a lot because he's got some really good ones. And Illusion of Justice another iconic. I mean, you might even say that and TikTok are on the same level. Maybe with a little Truth Train sitting there on it with it, because Truth Train's another one. These are the iconic tunes that Stacy's made, and they are great. And so it was awesome. But, you know, he likes to get into the studio with Mark Atkinson. And that gentleman is extremely talented and gifted himself. And I will say, there are some songs that when Stacy goes into the studio, it comes out and I'm like, knocks my socks off. I'm like, that's a good one. Ma and Pa Avery. Holy crap. The Barn Studio version of Ma and Pa Avery is dude, that is a fine piece of, you know, music right there. It is a absolutely brilliant song, and Mark Atkinson totally made that song jump even more out at you and grab you. So that's one of them, and there's a lot of them that I mean, I like the polish in the studio, don't get me wrong, but I still like that gritty Stacy, right? But, you know, yeah, he goes over. And Mark Atkinson has done some really wonderful things, and so I keep supporting Stacy because there's, you know, even though he's less he's less enthusiastic about himself in the grittier versions that he does. I just want him to have more faith in himself. Honestly, he's you know, absolutely right to have faith in Mark Atkinson. I mean, Mark Atkinson is truly gifted. In fact, I got to looking into Mark Atkinson because I know that's, you know, who studio who Stacy goes when he goes into the studio. He goes to see Mark Atkinson, and I was checking out, and he has a YouTube channel. So those of you out there who are interested, you can check out Mark Atkinson's channel. He's he's a very, very gifted guitar player, I'll tell you. So I get it. I get why Stacy likes to take his stuff in and he likes to put that polish on it. We just need to get him to realize that his solo stuff is great too, right? Everybody, are you with me, folks? Hey, out there in the chat, are you with me? Yeah? All right. So, anyways, no, we love Stacy, and I'll keep encouraging him. Obviously, go give Mark Atkinson a look. That's the guy. He's, Ma and Pa Avery again, dude. Whew, that one. When that one went into the studio, that one came out. That went in as a pretty good song. It came out as a freaking diamond. It's a diamond. I mean, that Barn Studio versions of Ma and Pa Avery is just freaking off the hook. I mean, it's just off the hook. So, everybody go over there, subscribe to Stacy Seabrook. Go over there and subscribe to his good friend Mark Atkinson. I will go ahead and put the links for both of their channels down below. And, hope everybody enjoyed Mamathon. You can look forward to more coming later this week. I will be pulling out probably my interview with Sydney and also my interview with Dr. Silkman. I know a lot of you will be excited about that. So be looking forward to me uploading those segments alone. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.